who really benefits? Who will really benefit from a federal European Union?
Well, one thing it does do is to exclude progressive policies. I mean, to take an immediate example, as you know, the post office is being privatised. They've introduced competition. Why? Because Europe says you can't have a monopoly post office. So now the post office is facing competition from TNT. TNT don't have to supply letters all over the country. I mean, the post office, one of the reasons it has financial difficulties is if you post a letter across London, you put first-class stamp, but you can also send it to Orkney and Shetlands. The blind get all their material, which is quite heavy, you know, braille, can be sent free. That doesn't apply to the competitors. And indeed, TNT actually supply letters to the post office, and the post office delivers them. They don't even deliver letters. So it's a completely, it's completely wrong, but it's being imposed on us. We would never have agreed to it ourselves.
Right.
Imposed on us, and they say, well, that's Europe.
So
And these laws of control will get greater and greater. I mean, all immigration control will be under the hands of the European government, in effect, after this new treaty goes through. And we spend a lot of money on it too. It's quite an expensive business being a member. You'll have some benefits, but the thing is a top-down attempt to run Europe as in a centralised way, allegedly on the grounds that China's powerful, India's powerful, America's powerful, Europe's got to be powerful. But if you take that view, argue for it. I mean, you could argue, I'm not saying I'd favour it, but you could have the United States of Europe where you elect a president, you elect a parliament, Parliament makes the laws, the president has to follow that. Oh no, they don't want that. Oh no, no, no. Because the commission the commissioners are the people who are utterly determined to retain their power. And also, it's the only constitution in the world committed to capitalism.
Right.
I mean, America could go socialist. They're going to stop America if they wanted to. Could vote to nationalise their basic industry, do that. We can't in Europe because the constitution lays down what you can and can't do.
Sure. I mean, from the point of view of a corporate power, it's quite a useful thing.
Oh, very useful.
Yeah.
It destroys the prospects of socialism anywhere in Europe by making capitalism the constitutional requirement of that setup, yeah.
So they have now access to massive markets and things which they hadn't...
Well, I'm in favour of, in general, of trading as widely as you can. I don't want trade wars and all that. But that's rather different from laying down the constitution in such a way as to make it illegal, constitutionally illegal, if you did want to buy a company or intervene in the market.
Cool. Now, some people say that there are more sinister games afoot with regards to the way that treaties are created and how the European proponents come up with things like the EU Reform Treaty, and they point to organisations like the Bilderberg Group. What do you think of?
Well, I'm not a conspiracy theorist man myself.
Right.
I mean, there are conspiracies, but if you start talking in those terms, you limit yourself to people who are sort of quite frenetic about these things. A bit like 9/11. They say that Bush knew about it. Well, perhaps he did, I don't know, but I'm not talking about that because the real question is the war. Sure. And of course the rich people do get together and they have a common interest, of course they do. But then the trade unions have a common interest, and that's the side I'm on their side, and trade union power is now being grossly limited, whereas corporate power is becoming increasingly free. And that's part of the background against which this whole story is being played out.
I have an article here from the Herald Tribune which says that it's likely that a vote will go before the Parliament on the Treaty of Lisbon between March and...
Yes, it'll be sometime this spring, I think, yeah.
Right. So, in a sense, the clock is ticking.
Oh, yes, yes. Well, Brown is determined to do it. I mean, there's no question about it. And the three-line whip will mean that Labour MPs will lose the right to defend the rights of their constituents if they obey the whip. It's a very, very big issue.
Can you just briefly explain how that whipping system works within this situation?
Well, when the treaty comes to Parliament, the government will recommend that Parliament ratifies, which is the procedure. and MPs will be told by the whips, if you don't vote for that, you might be expelled from the party and so on, disciplined. And MPs will think, well, if that happens, I might be defeated in the next election because there'll be an official Labour candidate against me or whatever, and therefore they may be driven into saying yes when they don't really agree. I mean, you have to have three-line whips for some purposes. After all, if you're elected as a party, I was never elected as Tony Benn, I was elected as a Labour MP, and people knew what the manifesto said, and when I got there I tried to implement it, and things changed occasionally. But this is different from that. This isn't indeed, insofar as a manifesto commitment at all, it was to have a referendum, because we pledged there would be one on the treaty, and then they turned the treaty into what they call a tidying up. Said it isn't a treaty anymore, it isn't a constitution anymore, it is a constitution.
Yes. Now, you mentioned that the BBC have really not touched this subject and not interested. If no serious media force is going to take on this subject, how do you think the British people will be made aware of?
Well, the Murdoch, I'm no supporter of Murdoch, but the Murdoch press is against it.
Right.
Whether he will be now, I don't know so fully, because he's got other interests, long-term interests. But at least there will be some debate, and I think there'll have to be a national referendum campaign. There is a referendum campaign developing, and I'm a supporter of it.
Excellent. Do you think that the organisations like UKIP and obviously the right wing have tarnished, well not tarnished, but made in the public eye any sort of criticism of the EU seem like a sort of a nationalistic?
Well, this is the problem. The problem is that there's a democratic argument, which is my argument, and a nationalist argument, which is UKIP. I mean, no country's independent in the world. This idea of if you mean by sovereignty the right to control the world, nobody can look at the United States, the most powerful country in the history of the world, didn't protect it from 9/11. So sovereignty doesn't mean you control, but it means you have the right to respond to a situation you don't control. You can decide how to respond, where things happen you don't like, but you'll lose the right to respond. That'll be decided by others.
Right. What would you recommend to people out there who, number one, are completely in the dark about the European Union?
Well, to try and explain it, I mean, history is made by two groups of people, the teachers who explain what's happening, and movements that change what's happening, and it's the interrelationship of the two. I mean, all I can do, I'm not a member of Parliament anymore, but I can and do all the time go around talking about it, so people understand, just as your broadcast it will help people to understand. Then the question is, do movements come into being? Now the TUC, which was very much in favour of the European arrangement, is now against the treaty, and so you've got a mixture of left and right. But I'm not a nationalist, but I recognise that if there's a vote for or against the this new arrangement, I shall find myself voting with Conservatives, but then so will those in favour.
Do you think that, I mean, I've heard a lot of arguments for the Union, which is based very much in two world wars and...
Oh yes, well I understand all that, yes. And Ted Heath, I used to talk to Ted, and he'd say, look Tony, we've had two wars and killed each other, we can't do it again. Well, I agree with that. But that doesn't automatically mean you hand over power to people you don't elect, can't remove, who don't have to listen. I mean, why do MPs listen? Because they can be removed. I can't remove Mandelson.
Yeah.
He was never elected by anybody. Brown didn't even, or Blair didn't even go to the House of Commons to approve Mandelson.
So Peter Mandelson, what position does he hold at the moment? Is he?
Well, now he's the Commissioner for Trade.
Right.
But I mean, he was appointed by the Prime Minister of the day, Blair, using the royal prerogative to make appointments. So the link between the sort of monarchical system, which is now doesn't really exist as a monarchical system, but the powers have gone to the Prime Minister, who used them as if he was king, and so we're back really to a medieval system.
Did Tony Blair use that royal prerogative for the Iraq War, or was that
Yes, he did.
Right.
Well, I mean, he did ask Parliament. We didn't have to ask Parliament.
No.
Appoints Mandelson, appoints the Archbishop of Canterbury, appoints ministers, he appointed... I mean, the powers of patronage are enormous, and they're done in the name of the Crown, not the Queen, but the Crown, by the Prime Minister of the day, and they're now being used to dismantle the democratic structures that we had in respect of who makes the laws.